Thank you very much, Dame Stephanie, for such an incredible speech. I'm thinking that we have all been wondering how we have ended up with such a messed up world. Perhaps it is because we do not have more of that type of leadership. That leadership that you, Dame Shirley, represent, the leadership of kindness and resilience. My background is in journalism, and almost 10 years ago, I launched Global Thinkers Forum as a platform to promote visionary leadership. And eventually, the organization has grown into a family of diverse initiatives that also advance female leadership, women in leadership, by creating opportunities for us to be recognized for our work and connecting women to peers and networks and expertise and ideas and projects around the world. And this is what Athena40 is about. I believe that in the years to come, we will see more visionary female leadership. Women are shining a light of hope, of action across the world. It is not enough yet, we're getting there. Over this panel, the upcoming leadership and leadership in a new world panel, we're going to discuss a variety of issues that touch on the need for new leadership models, but also how that global pandemic has generated new complexity on many levels. And that reality, along with festering social issues, highlights the demand for restarting the way we knew governance and highlights the need to look for a solution-focused partnership and governance model. So allow me now to introduce my panelists in alphabetical order. I would like to invite you to switch your cameras on, and thank you very much for joining us at the Athena40 Forum today. Mrs. Rosalía Arteaga. Rosalía is the first Ecuadorian woman to become president and vice president of the Republic of Ecuador. She was also Vice Minister of Culture and Minister of Education. Currently, Dr. Arteaga is CEO of Fidal Foundation and President of the Advisory Council of Co-Futuro Foundation. Welcome to Athena40. Tobias Ellwood. Tobias is a Conservative MP for Bournemouth, apologies, Tobias East. You have been Under Secretary of State at the Ministry of Defense from 2017 to 2019, and you also served as Under Secretary of State of Foreign Affairs. Tobias is hailed a hero for trying to save the life of fallen Casey Keith Palmer at the Westminster attack in 2017. We all remember his efforts to save the life of Constable. So next on the panel is Princess Sumaya, the President of Royal Scientific Society in Jordan. Her Royal Highness, welcome to the panel. You are an advocate of science and technology as catalysts for change in the Arab world and internationally. You are an ambassador for education, research, and innovation. And since 2017, you have been named UNESCO Special Envoy for Science for Peace. And you are currently overseeing another visionary project, the development of the first National Museum in Jordan. Welcome. Lord Michael Hastings. Lord Hastings is Chancellor, Regent's University London. Previously, you have been the BBC's Head of Public Affairs, and the BBC's first head of corporate social responsibility before anyone else knew what corporate social responsibility was about. In 2005, you were awarded the honor of an independent peerage to the House of Lords by Her Majesty the Queen. Welcome. Silvana Koch-Mehrin. Silvana, you are the president and founder of the Women Political Leaders, WPL, as it is known. It is a worldwide network of female politicians, and so WPL's mission is to increase the number and influence of women in political leadership, something that we need badly. You have served as vice president of the European Parliament between 2009 to 2011, and for 10 years, between 2004 and 14, you were a member of the European Parliament. And in 2018 and 2019, you have been ranked as one of the 100 most influential persons in gender equality. Great to have you with us. Finally, the Reverend Canon Mpho Tutu van Furth. Mpho is an Episcopal priest, an artist, author, and public speaker. You have had many roles, Mpho, in non-profit leadership. With her wife, Marceline, she has established and is executive director of the Tutu Teach Foundation that enhances access to opportunity for women and girls. And Mpho works for environmental justice, human rights, and equal access to opportunity for all people without regard to race, class, or gender. I'm truly honored to welcome you all. And I would like to begin this conversation with Silvana's, inviting Silvana's insights. You're very welcome to have your microphones on. We're going to take questions live through Q&A, so I would like to also encourage our attendees to keep typing their questions under the Q&A. We want to make it interactive, and we want to invite and to have the insights of people who are attending. So, Silvana, currently, women govern 18 countries, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I am wrong, please, and 500 million people globally. Which is, it may sound impressive, but it is not, because it is only 7% of the world's population. We've seen over the past year, which has been an unthinkable year for all of us, that female leaders in places like New Zealand, Taiwan, and Iceland have been applauded for their effective strategies in their quick response to the coronavirus pandemic. Do you think, and I would like the honest and objective answer to that, that women make better leaders, and if so, why?
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth, for this slightly bit provocative question, maybe, because what is better? I mean, how do you measure better or worse, by what parameters? However we try to measure at women political leaders is what people think. So not only my personal opinion, but the opinions and the perceptions of people across the G7 countries, and also including the countries of Nigeria, Kenya, and India. And we call this exercise the Reykjavik Index for Leadership. We do this now for 3 consecutive years. And it's in cooperation with Kantar, which does in a very professional way those kind of surveys. And what we measure there is how do people perceive the suitability for leadership of women or men across more than 20 sectors. And this includes, of course, also politics. And it's a very sobering outcome, if I may say, a bit of a British understatement in the presence of several British politicians. It's sobering because we are very far away still from that. One would say it doesn't actually matter if you're a woman or a man, just what matters is your qualification for a position of leadership. And in 2018, 2019, we were hoping that maybe 2020 outcomes would find a slight progress. But what's worrying is that there is not only a very, very striking absence of progress in terms of it doesn't matter if you're a woman or man, what matters is your qualification. What's worrying is that specifically in younger age groups, the perception is that women are less suitable for leadership positions than there are men. Basically, the older one gets, in that survey across all the 3 years, the more likely one comes to this wisdom to say, if you're woman or man, doesn't exactly matter. And one other finding that we would have hoped to see, because as you mentioned, Elizabeth, now in this COVID-19 crisis, many countries that are led by women are doing, relatively speaking, better than other countries, that this would have impacted the perception of, well, yes, women can be taking tough decisions, women can be taking fast decisions, but at the same time, they're also very compassionate, as you have put as one of the terms here, like the Prime Minister of Norway, talking to children about the impact of a lockdown and taking their views into account. But we need to postpone this hope to next year. Maybe findings will show some progress there, and now begin also even more so dealing with the ways to change perceptions, so that we can come to not always again the same struggles, that women every day feel the inequalities, whereas men seem to be seen more likely having a birthright, so to say, for leadership.
Thank you. I agree with you that still data is too weak to be able to make conclusions. But what we've seen is that virtues like presence, empathy, compassion, which are considered, for whatever reason, female virtues, they have been very much in need. And this is perhaps why women leaders and heads of state have been hailed as being better leaders or more effective leaders through this pandemic. Lord Hastings, over to you now. You grew up in an oppressed Jamaica during the Cold War era. And as a young boy, you witnessed a considerable transformation in your environment. It was a period that was charged with social anger. And that rising anger of the Black majority was being crushed into poverty. And as a consequence, people were attacking each other in the streets. That was some decades ago, but it sounds as it was a few months ago. And
Well,
this is actually what we have been witnessing in the States, in Britain. We talk about change, we talk about progress, but how fast, after all, is that progress?
well, thank you for reminding me of my painful childhood experiences from the 1970s. And as you remind me, they come vividly back. Obviously, I'm from a generation, maybe Tobias's as well, where we didn't photograph everything, we just remembered it. And so the minute you plug it, up it comes. Is it the same? Well, in some strange way, what I saw on the streets of Montego Bay, Jamaica, where I witnessed person-to-person physical violence as a result of a political decision that people had taken under mistaken hype to elect what was in effect a pro-USSR because it was pro-Cuban government. And then I watched the first effects of globalization. In other words, America unhappy at this tiny island making its own independent decision, although effectively a bad one, and therefore closing an economy down as an act of victimization. If I parallel that to 2020, the killing of George Floyd on the 23rd of May of this year, the subsequent many police attacks in the US, and to be honest, a few that we are discomforted by here in the UK. You ask the question, has anything really changed? The answer is, thank God, yes, it has. Whether it's in American politics, British politics, European or international politics, with women in greater positions of dignity, leadership, responsibility, and oversight, Black people in many positions of responsibility, dignity, leadership, oversight, many African countries now to which we can point: Botswana, Rwanda, Kenya, Ghana. Ghana's election just hailed by the Financial Times as one of the most peaceful, non-event presidential elections you could possibly imagine. We would never have said that in the 1970s. We would never have had countries on the continent of Africa like Rwanda we'd hail as actually symbolic of technological innovation, let alone reconciliation and peacemaking. So has anything changed? Yes, it has. But you know what lingers in the same way as I know it deeply irritates many of your viewers and of course the panel, that attitudes towards women can easily remain discriminating and demeaning. Then you add into that Black woman, African Black woman, you really are in a different space altogether. And you add color into misunderstanding and into prejudice and discrimination, because most of us take the instant hit of when we see someone, we come to a rapid 40-second, 4-second decision. Most people, it's a 4-second decision. So the way we look, the kind of color that we are, how we represent, that's the way people determine things about us. And what we have seen in 2020 is street-based violence, whether it was in Charlotte in the United States, cars driving into crowds, violence on the streets of American cities, turbulence and violence on our own streets as a reaction and a response to continuing savage discrimination. And therefore, the question that sits on every leader, and as referring to the US, I would include President Barack Obama in this as much as I would include President Trump, as much as I would include Tony Blair, as much as I would include Boris Johnson, David Cameron, Theresa May, in our case here in the UK, wherever it happens to be. The question that sits on it is this an urgent enough issue in the same way that it became right for European countries, in my judgment, to set hard quotas which brought women into positions of governance and leadership. And I've always believed in quotas. I was a member of the Commission for Racial Equality for 9 years. We exercised the law on quotas. Why is it not right to ensure that people of quality and dignity and character are brought to the fore simply because they've been missed? And the mass scope, in the same way that women have been overlooked, people of color have been overlooked. Our world, one of the big changes our world is going through, and I'll wrap up with this point for you, Elizabeth, one of the big changes our world is going through is by 2050, according to the UN, Africa will be the most populous place on earth. 2.4 billion people. Nigeria with 91 million people, second most populous country on the planet after India. Well, you see, in other words, the world is turning more black and more female. And if that is the case, what are the attitudes in the dominant cultures of the world, which of course are northern and to a large extent good? What are the attitudes that now need to change? We've seen dramatic change for women. We haven't seen dramatic change for Black women. That's the next phase, and that's my fight.
Thank you. Thank you, Lord Hastings. Well, the world indeed is becoming more Black and more diverse. The question is whether it is becoming more inclusive, right, and more accountable. And I would like to invite Mpho to intervene here and give us your ideas, your thoughts. What do you think? Do you agree that perhaps we have not addressed those issues in that urgent, imminent manner that we should have been doing? And how shall we approach things from here onwards? This is a tremendous opportunity for humanity to restart. So that crisis, which has taken us all by shock, it is at the same time a great momentum for leaders in particular, for emerging leaders, to bring their vision or a new, refreshed vision for the world. What do you think, Mpho?
I have to agree with Lord Hastings that that people of color in general, women of color in particular, African women in most particular, have been at the bottom of the diversity totem pole. Black women the world over are consistently asked to choose in terms of, do you identify as women when seeking women's liberation and opportunities for women, or do you identify yourself as Black, as though we're supposed to tear apart our identity in some way, and that to privilege one part of our identity over another. And so one of the things that has been really heartening for me this year, as horrific as the year has been, one of the things that was really heartening was as the world turned out in outrage to protest the death of George Floyd, and to protest police brutality, and to protest all of those things, there was a real attention to what is called intersectionality, that it is not a matter of choosing one identity over another, and that being the stand on which you fight for justice. But to recognize that all struggles for justice are intimately interwoven. And any time that one experiences injustice, that it opens the door for the next injustice to piggyback on it and come into the door. And so that, you know, when you look at a woman and say, well, just hold on your racial identity, let's work on the woman thing first, and then we'll get to the race thing next. Or let's work on the ability thing first, and we'll get to disability rights next. Or let's work on, you know, whatever the metric is. We can't work on them individually, atomically, as atomic rights. That we really do have to pay attention to flourishing for all of us, because it is only when all of us have the opportunity to flourish, to achieve our best life, that any of us truly can be secure in what it is that we have accomplished and achieved.
Thank you, Mpho. Rosalía, I would like to ask you, you have suffered a lot of losses in your life, deep losses. And that year has been a year of losses for all of us. For some people, it has been much worse, and that has to be acknowledged. And it's not going to be an easy year ahead. However, we are resilient by nature as human beings, and we know how to survive. We find ways to adapt, survive, and thrive. And so I would like to invite you to share with us, how did your losses change you, and in what ways, and what did you learn that you can share with us?
Thank you, Elizabeth, and congratulations for organizing this Athena40 forum. I'm very happy to participate in it and to share some ideas with all these distinguished guests. Yes, I have some loss that touch me deeply, and it hasn't been with politics, because of course I suffered some female discrimination when I was in politics, even in the biggest position that a person can achieve in a country, like being president of the republic. And I feel that being a female was something that some politicians uses against me. But it doesn't have to do with that. It has to do mainly with some loss that I suffer in my own family. As I was hearing them to talk about autism and talk about the loss, I was feeling very close because of the loss of my kid. I was a very young mom. I have one kid, and when I was pregnant, waiting my second kid, and he was born, we discovered that he had Down syndrome. And it was, we were talking about the 80s, a shock because most of the people doesn't accept to have that kind of kids. But in my family, we discovered that he was a blessing, and he was extraordinarily good for the family. But unfortunately, the situation gets worse and worse, and we lose him when he was only 10 months of age. At that time, I was pregnant of my third kid. But when I lose Geronimo, that was his name, I was thinking that I lose my life. I didn't want to continue living. But at the same time, I was thinking that I have a baby that was growing and another one growing on my belly. And I say, wow, I must continue doing things. and living for them, for my family, and also I was thinking about families that were in the same position at my family was living on. Well, my way to do a catharsis was writing, and always had been writing what I feel. And I write a book about Geronimo. That book was at the beginning thinking about how to help the families and how to do my own catharsis, telling the others what was happening. And it makes me more resilient at the end. And understanding what the important things are in life and what are not important things in life. When I feel that something is going wrong, I think, but okay, we must find a way to do it. And I think this experience that make me resilient and taking the lead in many things, not only trying to help Down syndrome kids, but also with other situations, and also working in politics and in journalism. We share that, Elizabeth, and trying to do the things the best I can. And I think this nowadays situation with the COVID-19, it will probably, because it's a disaster for all the planet, but it will probably gives the opportunity to rethink what we are doing with the world, what we are doing with climate change, what we are doing with all these uncertainties and all these asymmetries that we are living in the present world. Then my thoughts go through, we must go for better, and we must create other opportunities. I agree with Silvana when she expressed the concerns about what's happening with women nowadays. I'm a teacher. I had been an educator most of my life, and I feel that a lot of girls are losing the opportunity to study, and a lot of women are losing the jobs because the companies and the public affairs are easily letting them go away and maintain them at home. But
yes, Rosalía, you're absolutely right. I don't want to interrupt you, but I just want to say here something that Vicky Price, a British economist and author, she was in this morning panel, and she said that this is a system that we have created that must be changed completely, because it is a system that is hostile towards women. And with that, I would like to, Tobias, to invite your intervention here. People, especially in these times which are uncertain, they're fluid, they need strong, calm, and trustworthy leadership. And it seems that this is most important than ever. Do you think that governments currently are delivering to people, or are we perhaps in need of a new social contract?
Well, Elizabeth, thank you very much indeed for inviting me. I should explain, I've just had to move rooms because we've had a fire alarm here in France. I'm in a rather grand setting here, but let me begin by saying thank you for putting together Athena40 and everything that you're doing to promote this important cause. And it was a pleasure to hear Dame Stephanie as well on her experiences. Very profound indeed. It was only a couple of months ago that I was at a poker game, a charity poker game. And I don't know how to play poker. Nobody in the room knew how to play. There were about 50 of us in there, and we were all given some chips, and we played the evening. And as you lost, you stepped away, and the winners went on until eventually there were just 8 people around the final table. And all 8 of those were women. Why? Because the men had thrown their money away. They had risked everything. They had done things. They had been charged in there. And the women were, none of us knew the rules really. None of us were gifted players. But all of us, we were too robust, too ruthless in what we were doing. And for me, that was a real wake-up call, if you like, just to show a general attitude. And education, actually, I think is so important, just been mentioned there. The importance of teaching people actually how to think, not what to think. So I'd absolutely endorse that. But your question, Elizabeth, was about leadership. And it's so important because the world is going through a decade of profound change. and it's been promoted, I'm afraid, to a darker place because of COVID, a move towards authoritarianism, away from globalism. We've got countries wanting to be less exposed, become more sectarian, become more isolated perhaps, not be so exposed to the international global order. A global order that did well had its creations after the Second World War, but is now looking a bit rickety. It needs updating. But the West, as an alliance, we've lost that sense of resolve, sense of purpose of what we stand up for and what we believe in. And at the same time, we have state actors, non-state actors, authoritarian states. I have to point out China particularly, choosing to follow their own geopolitical agenda. So if ever there was a time for robust, political, wise leadership, it is absolutely now. So this conference that we're having here today is so important indeed. It was interesting, it was mentioned what's happening in the United States, the attitude, if you like, of Donald Trump in being aggressive, in being, all the things that we know that he actually is. And how did Joe Biden and Kamala Harris present themselves? They presented themselves as empathy, as empathetic to the situation, not aggressive, wanting to bring people together, unite, to heal. And I think there's a lot of measure there to recognize that that's where we need to go. And that's absolutely what women bring to the table. I think from the Western perspective, perhaps it gets less notice, but from a European perspective, we have some role models that perhaps we should promote more and more. In NATO, for example, the heads of government, Denmark, Germany, Iceland, Norway, all have female leaders. What's really interesting is that ministers of defense, you've got Albania, Belgium, Denmark again, France, Germany, Netherlands, Spain as well, all have female heads of our military. Now, 10 years ago, that would not have been considered at all. And likewise, we have political leaderships as well. In Scotland, we've got Nicola Sturgeon. We have the Green Party, Sean Berry, and of course, Arlene Foster in Northern Ireland. And we've got some feisty characters in cabinet too, but clearly there needs to be more. It's still seen, politics, as a role for men. And until you articulate the point that everybody should be given the opportunity, have that education, and there's a place for you, I'm afraid it will continue to be so. It will still be a challenge for women to participate in there. So I think absolutely, this is a decade that's going to be difficult, it's going to be tricky. And the more that there is a representation from women to include that and advance that, absolutely better it will be for global security and stability.
Thank you, Tobias. And just to reinforce the initial point you made about the poker game, they say that women make better investors because we are calmer. We do not tend to, overreact or panic when, a share slump, and we tend to hold on to our portfolio for a much longer time than you guys. So that makes a more profitable portfolio. So, Your Royal Highness, I would like to now visit your work, but also your experience in the Arab world. You work at the Royal Scientific Society in Jordan and the Princess Sumaya University, Technical University, and you have been working across generations of women for years now. How do you see leadership by women progressing in the Arab world and of course internationally? How quickly or how slowly is that happening?
First of all, Elizabeth, it's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm so pleased that I have this opportunity, despite the distance that COVID has created, to be able to see you in person. So thank you for inviting me to be a member of this very distinguished panel and to see old friends and new as well, and also to feel incredibly humbled having listened to everybody who has spoken, and not least Dame Stephanie as well. It was very moving to hear what she said. And if you'd allow me, before I answer your question, just picking up from what Lord Hastings said, I've just, so many thoughts have been buzzing through my head. And I don't know whether it's a coincidence or not that you decided to hold this forum today on the eve of tomorrow, which will be the International Day for Human Rights. but as somebody who's the granddaughter of one of the signatories of the UN Declaration on Human Rights, I felt that I really need to just elaborate a little bit further my thoughts on what Lord Hastings was saying so very correctly. And that is that there are so many prejudices and we should all support each other in countering them. And I say this today, not only as a woman, but as an Arab and a Muslim woman. When we think about the rights, dignity, and protection, and particularly the needs of refugees and displaced people in this part of the world, but around our planet, who are being undermined as the world faces a global displacement crisis. And we start considering the latest figures from UNHCR, which record 79.5 million displaced people. 45.7 million are displaced within their own countries. And of them, we consider that 45.7 are Muslims. That number of people displaced due to conflict and persecution is the highest it has ever been, while the climate emergency is also having a catastrophic impact on displacement. But what scares us all, or from my part of the world in particular, is that when we think that more than 2/3 of all refugees worldwide have come from just 5 countries in the world: Syria, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Myanmar, and Somalia. That really sort of, for me, puts it all into context, and it makes us start thinking that all identities should be respected and allowed the same opportunities. So I just felt very much that I needed to say that on the outset. But with reference to your question about how do I see leadership by women progressing, well, you know, leadership is far more than ordering and commanding or managing. Often it is living and working in a way that inspires and gives hope and encouragement to others. And you know, building on the 3 C's that this conference is based on: compassion, competence, and confidence. I think very much in these times of COVID-19, it's all those nations and communities that have led with compassion that really now seem the strongest. If we could take that from this terrible year, that compassionate leadership is strong leadership. And that's what truly benefits society and the wider world. So competent leadership means recognizing the competence of others. There is a time to defer to greater knowledge, to ask for and act on good advice. And leaders must not try to be all things to all people. Confidence comes from experience, and ironically from humility, knowing how to support, inspire, delegate, and step aside at the right time. And there's still a great deal of gender imbalance in research and innovation, the world that I now come from Japan to the United States, and from Jordan to Australia. This is an imbalance that damages all our societies and deprives our global human family of so much potential for progress and positive change. Here in Jordan, we do what we can to involve women, and I'm incredibly proud of that. We try our best to unlock talent and to give them the courage and skills to forge opportunities to really be leaders themselves. And that process begins with education and blossoms through mentoring. At my university, the Sumaya University for Technology, we've previously partnered with something called the Tech Women Initiative, a public-private partnership that pairs emerging women in technology from the Middle East and North Africa with American women mentors from Silicon Valley. And there's nothing more rewarding than seeing these talented and driven young women open up thanks to the encouragement from successful and inspiring mentors. But really, true leadership nurtures talent. There is no doubt that women in the Middle East and around the world need strong role models to guide and to encourage them. And we're certainly very lucky in my part of the world when I start thinking of the women, the Arab Muslim women who are leading us. They certainly have been fantastic role models. I mentioned one grandmother. My other grandmother actually led the first Arab women movement and established the Muslim Red Crescent, which was part of the the Red Cross family as well. But we certainly have no shortage of our own homegrown success stories. Women in the Science Hall of Fame program at the university honors women in our region from a variety of scientific disciplines for their achievements and their ability to motivate young women to pursue scientific careers. And in case anyone might think that female leadership in scientific research goes against tradition or history in my region, I would remind them that women have a heritage here in this part of the world of 4,000 years in science. Women have long been central to learning in the Arab and Islamic worlds, and we think about people like Fatima al-Fihri as an example of the women pioneers who populate the history of our civilization. She founded the University of Kairouan in Fez in Morocco in 859 as the world's first academic degree-granting institution of higher education. And if anyone also requires an example of a woman who enabled to innovate in an ancient context, then I would mention Hedwana, the chief astronomer priestess of the moon goddess in the ancient city of Babylon, Iraq, who lived around the year 2350 BCE. She's one of those early giants on whose shoulders the scientists of today still stand. Indeed, modern astronomy and mathematics follow an almost continuous line of effort from Sumaya to the present day. So this is truly valuable and inspiring leadership, a trailblazer who can help to unlock talent today. I can go through individual names of different people that I have the privilege of working with every single day, women who inspire me. But in particular—
Thank you. Yes, no, you've mentioned some incredible names and some fantastic work that you have in place in Jordan. And Athena, as you know, that you have been an ambassador and supporter from the beginning, has been named after the Greek goddess of wisdom and fearlessness. And so that fearlessness is something, is a culture, is a mindset that we would like to promote, not because, we are against fear. Fear can be good, but it should not be a dominant feeling. It should not hold women back from giving their best, from maximizing their potential. I wonder whether something to factor in these conversations is the younger generation and how perceptions among young male leaders or emerging leaders or aspiring leaders need to change. And I would like to bring here and invite again for an intervention Silvana. You hosted about 2 weeks ago, wasn't it, at Reykjavik, the Global Women's Forum, and you also had the Index for Leadership, which produced some worrying results when it comes to prejudice and unconscious bias among the younger generation of men, right?
Yeah, well, thank you, Elizabeth. And I guess Tobias is the one who is the closest to being a young man here in our group. So maybe insights from him would be extremely valuable as well. What we measure across the G7 countries plus India, Kenya, and Nigeria is indeed the perception and the age group of men 18 to 34 years old. So those which will definitely be the next generation of leaders, and some of the ones maybe in their early 30s could already have acquired leadership or on the kind of strong path to leadership positions, but their perceptions indeed show that it's not only the absence of progress, but there is a rollback happening. And let me go back to what Rosalía said and the importance of education. It's so important what kind of role models children have, both at home, but also in the educational system and what is taught. and that prejudices are not perpetuated, that value systems can change. And when Tobias mentioned the NATO summits, that's one of the few international assemblies where one doesn't have to put on extra thick glasses to find the woman in the picture. Because if you look at APAC, if you look at African Union, if you look at the Americas, there is a striking absence of women in leadership, not only politics, but also in the other sectors. So numbers matter, because if you don't see that women in leadership is normal and one doesn't have to think about it, how do you think that this is not normal? I mean, it's like, it's a perpetuating. So I really like what Lord Hastings said, that he was a firm advocate for quotas, which might be a short-term fix, but it really needs to go deeper, and education certainly plays a very, very important.
Thank you, Silvana. We're entering now our final 10 minutes, and I would like to make a final round to all of you. I think that Lord Hastings' connection has been interrupted, but let me take first a very interesting question about multilateralism. And Tobias, this is raised from one of our attendees. COVID-19 also exposed the loopholes in the multilateral system and fragmented response of political leadership. Don't you think we need a reform in multilateralism? Also, what about the regionalism that is becoming stronger day by day? This is a very powerful question from Hafiz, actually one of our mentees at the program.
Yeah, I think this is the question for the decade. We are seeing a power transference away from those traditional bases that we've known for a number of decades. In our lifetimes, China will become more powerful than the United States, economically, militarily, and technologically. Something that's called the Thucydides trap, the transfer of power from one superpower to a rising power. How is that handled? History shows the last few thousand years that when one power base grows and another one diminishes, it normally involves conflict. The only time that's really happened is when the British Empire, if you like, ceded power to the United States as being the global superpower. But I'm afraid with China, we see a country not really willing to embrace international global order, nor support it, but follow their own rules. And a consequence of that has been a reflection in COVID that you mentioned. Here we have a pandemic, a crisis, a global crisis, and you would think this would bring people together to solve this internationally, a collective effort. And yet we saw, I'm afraid, the two superpowers actually charge at each other. And yes, there has been some cooperation, but not on the scale that we should really be handling in this. And I'm afraid it'll be the poorer countries in the world that will suffer because of this. So there is absolutely an urgency to look at these global institutions that have served us well. I touched on this before, but boy, do they need updating, because in the way we do business, they're no longer as relevant as they were before. They're not enforced. There's nobody you can go to. If you do a cyber attack on another country, where is the Geneva Convention to deal with that? If there's an encounter in space with weapons, there's no arbiter to be able to check what's going on and agreements as to how the rules should move forward. These are the big challenges over the next 10 years. If we don't address them, we will, I'm afraid, slide towards a bipolar world with the internet splitting into half, GPS splitting to versus the Beidou, the Chinese system, and countries then forced to look one way or another. Now, that is not good for democracy. It's not good for open, transparent leadership. I'm afraid it fuels instability. And when that happens, opportunity for education and for young girls and so forth then absolutely diminishes. And I'm afraid Britain is one country among many who've become too risk averse over the last number of years. And I hope that will now change, as I say, with a change in ownership in the White House.
I couldn't agree more, Tobias, and the fact that our international institutions that we have been trusting for decades to deliver to people, have not necessarily lived up to the expectations or the change, rather rapid change in our societies and the needs of the people. And that means that they will have perhaps to revisit whether they're still fit for purpose, or, and I'm referring to the European Union and I'm referring to the UN, so all the global institutions that are there, and we have been expecting them to be listening to what is happening, to be more agile, to be faster in responding, and not being as trapped in bureaucracy and perhaps very slow decision making. Mpho, you are the director of the Tutu Teach Foundation, and Tobias just raised a very important point about education and the role of education for young girls, and of course in general. I mean, this is what is going to transform our societies. And we have been wondering why this conference, of course, is about competence and confidence and women in leadership, but we have been wondering why we do not have more competent political leaders. What is the role of education, and how can we change things there in order to nurture more competent leaders?
Well, I mean, we know that over the course of this pandemic, that girls have really had their educational opportunities imperiled. And particularly when you look in the 2/3 world where digital access is negligible, and those who come from poorer families have, you know, even if you have digital access, you don't have the privacy to attend lessons online, or you know, all of those things have become huge problems for us in terms of education. But we also know that education is the one thing that can make a huge difference in how the world evolves, and that the more that we invest in education for girls, the better the outcomes for our countries, and that's true globally. Boys who are educated typically take their education and run. They'll go and do whatever it is that they go and do to benefit themselves. For girls who are educated, the outcomes are better not only for themselves, but for their families and for their communities. And so that, you know, every dollar that we're able to invest in education for girls is a dollar that returns multiple fold on that investment. And the problem is that very often we think of education being only what it is, that, you know, a transfer of knowledge from books. But we haven't looked really broadly at our education systems to say, what is it that we're actually educating you for? What is the person who we want to come out at the other end of our education sausage mill? And if we're not paying attention to educating for compassion, competence, and confidence, then don't expect those outcomes to be the outcomes that our education systems deliver.
Thank you, Mpho. Rosalía, any thought here about the system, education of Ecuador? Give us what is happening in your country. You have a first, which is a global first, of course, but it's good to learn from, you know, what is happening in other countries and perhaps emulating success stories. So if you could briefly give us, as we're now approaching the final minutes of this conversation.
Of course, yes, I will talk not only about what's happening in Ecuador, but in Latin America and in general. UNICEF says that we are losing 10 years in education, and it is a disaster because all we gained during the last decades, we are losing now because of the not possibility of a lot of young girls and young boys also to maintain themselves into education because of lack of, connectivity, about also the problem with the teachers that they are not prepared to online teaching, and also because they don't have the devices. Then it's a disaster. And I will try to go also about, you asked to Tobias about what the view has to be. And I think it has to be a local view, because we have the globalization. What it means is we can use all the tools that we have in this global world. But what's happening with local? We need to reinforce the good issues that local can provide, because local has to do with identity. Then when we mix the two concepts and the two words and neologism, we call it in Spanish or in English, glocal, could be the best approach about how to see this post-COVID world. Thank you. Microphone, please, Elizabeth.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Important point. So, Your Royal Highness, I would like to conclude this conversation with you with a question that is very much a stereotype about, Arab women, and whether the Arab world or Arab women rather, lack access to positions of leadership and influence. Do you think that there's any truth in this, or is it just plain stereotyping? And give us also the story from your country, but also from the wider region.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Certainly a stereotype, unfortunately, one that we're struggling to shake off, but on the ground, certainly one that we are making great strides with. When I was preparing my notes, I was overwhelmed with the amount of names that I could have cited. And as I said, no lack of strong Arab or Muslim women, not just from Jordan, but from around the region. And again, not just within the last few decades, but for thousands of years. So it's something which, again, perception, unfortunately, putting people into the boxes, all of this has to be broken down. And maybe this is something within 2020 that we have really been able to see. But in the context of COVID in particular, I would like to, cite one person in particular who has been working at my organization around the clock, actually a researcher who is very prominent in researching the Western Asia-backed research network, so work to do with COVID, and of course many others like her. This is Dr. Nisreen Ahmoud, who heads our Biosafety and Biosecurity Center at the Royal Scientific Society. But I can also mention, I did mention the Hall of Fame that was established by our vice president at the university, who not only is a female, but was also Jordan's first female dean of engineering at a university, graduate of Durham University as well, and so many others. Even the people I come into contact with every day, female elected heads of the student council at my university, and so on. So again, I think there are stereotypes, but the stigmas are being broken down. And I think if there's one thing that is a silver lining within this COVID process that we've all had to go through, it shows us all on one screen together. We've all been able to stand shoulder to shoulder, webinar after webinar, Zoom call after Zoom call, but it's what we all have to say that matters. And I think that's where we've certainly been able to see women influencers, leaders who have contributed so much and really are the trailblazers. So I think if there is something good to be said about this awful pandemic that we have all gone through, it's that when we come out the other side of it, I think we're going to be seeing very different faces of leadership, and meeting in cyberspace has maybe allowed for that to happen. So I'm trying to look at the glass as being half full.
Indeed, and thank you for that. And this is what we're doing, and why I was very keen to host Athena40 as a forum. I wanted us to contribute to, concluding that year on a positive, note, thinking about the prospects, the new ideas, the new projects, the new initiatives which are now looming. And I think that we are achieving that because we have people with us like yourselves who are achievers. They are, you're success orientated, but you're also visionary leaders who are keen to make positive change happen in your societies. And so on that note, I think we can now conclude that conversation. I would also like to highlight that it has been a very rich panel in insights, very global, and I couldn't be more grateful for all your presence here. I think that the next 9-10 years are going to be a decade for women in leadership to shine. You will allow me to say that, Tobias, I know that you are a supporter of, women and the work that we do at Athena40. And so thank you all. And thank you everyone for joining and raising those questions. We have many questions. We just ran out of time. Thank you so much.